We all get angry sometimes at ourselves, maybe at our kids, at God, at life, and so many other things. But what is the impact of anger on our lives? How about on you? And how about on your kids? Can we really stop being irritated, angry, and upset? Today's guest says we can. I'm glad you are here joining me to learn how this happens.
Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dinalynn Rosenbusch. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned. Because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Hello listeners, welcome back to the Language of Play. I am excited to announce another launch in 2024, and that is I will be doing a free monthly group coaching session. So if you have ever wondered what coaching is like, this is a chance for you to dabble and get insights from me, as well as from other parents, as we discuss the communication issues that people are dealing with at home. One thing I find is that no issue is really new. What you're dealing with, someone else is too. So therefore, we get real value when we listen to other people discuss how they taught a particular sound, or how they taught pronouns, or teach vocabulary, or what did they do with that temper tantrum, or how they got their kids to sleep, or what strategies did they use to overcome auditory processing struggles. There are just so many things. And what I do know is that since the issues are basically the same when we're dealing with children, this means that when you listen to someone else, you can say, oh, that's me too, and I know how I can apply that to my own parenting. As we embark on scheduling this group coaching session, I have lots of flexibility in scheduling. Some people expressed that the time that I had held the webinar was bad for them. So I'm giving you listeners a chance to pitch in your wishes and wants for dates and time for the next 3 days. So if you have an opinion, tell me. Send your email to me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com with your favorite day of the week and hour. I will arrange a time that works for as many as can come, and I will announce the date and time on the next episode. So I'm super excited for this, and I hope to see you there. And before we get started, I hope that you send me an email with your ideas for hours of the day and what day of the week. Now let's get started in today's episode with Dr. Mort Orman.
All right, thank you for joining me, Dr. Mort Orman. I'm so glad you are here today. Listeners, Dr. Mort Orman is an internal medicine physician with 40 years of success as an anger elimination expert. He is a creator of Angry No More, a 10-session anger elimination program, and he has led more than 100 anger and stress elimination workshops for doctors, nurses, lawyers, business owners, entrepreneurs, other professionals, and even the FBI. So I guess he's qualified to talk to us parents. He has a new book, Dr. Orman, Life-Changing Anger Cure. Eliminate anger without anger management so you can be happier, healthier, and don't end up divorced. Now, that is something that I know our audience is going to be interested in. I have had people say to me that divorce feels like it's on the verge. So, Dr. Mort Orman, I am very glad you're here. Thank you for joining me and answering my request to have you here. I have seen your work and I appreciate your work in the world.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and speak with you and your audience.
Thank you. It is so good. Now, how did you come to anger elimination? Like, tell us a little bit of your backstory before we get into my questions.
Well, I was fortunate as a kid. I grew up, there wasn't a lot of anger in my family. But when I got into my 20s, when I went off to college and then later medical school, I started having a lot of anger at myself when I would mess up something or get frustrated a lot, or also started to get angry at other people and just started to have a short fuse and couldn't really get rid of it. I kept trying. I didn't like the fact that I would just react and I couldn't control it. And it would cause problems in my life. And like I said, tried all the standard anger management, stress management stuff. It didn't work. And then the other thing is I'm taking care of patients now. I'm practicing medicine now. And as a doctor, you can see the angry people, who the angry people are and the non-angry people. And you see what happens to them over time. And you notice the difference in what happens to the angry group. And they have more illness and they have more divorces, more business failures, more estrangements from their kids, more addictions, more accidents. You see all this stuff and you realize you've got your own anger issues that you don't know how to deal with. And you feel like that drove me to continue to, I got to do something about this because I don't want to end up like that. I see where it's heading and I don't want to have those consequences. So that drove me into personal development work. Sure. And I did that for a couple of years. And I was fortunate. I studied with some really good people. And I was able to piece some things together that finally enabled me to handle and get rid of my anger problems. I had other problems too. I had anxiety problems. I had a lot of relationship problems. I had a tremendous fear of public speaking.
And here you are.
I would have never volunteered to do something like this. Or if I did, I would have been just a mess, so to speak. But I completely cured my fear of public speaking. So I learned some really good stuff that didn't teach me in medical school. They teach you about hearts and lungs and kidneys and stuff like that, but they don't teach you about people very much. Yeah. I mean, we had some psychology courses, but still that didn't really give you what you need to really understand people when you're taking care of them or even married to them or living with them or whatever. You're trying to deal with your own self as a human being,
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the damage that anger does in your patients' lives and how it was impacting your life too a little bit. Tell me a little bit more of how it impacted you and what it does in general. I kind of want to highlight that, but I don't think I can summarize what you said. The impact that anger has on us and on you. Mm-hmm.
Well, fortunately, I was young enough that it didn't have an impact on my health because I was so young. But I mean, if it had been going on for 40 or 50 years, you might have seen that. But so I didn't really suffer any health consequences. But it ruined all my relationships with women. I mean, every single relationship I had started off great, and then it fizzled, and there was a lot of anger involved and stuff. And I just didn't know. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to get my hands on the controls, which is true for most people today. And the other thing is, it really damaged my self-esteem because I had always been able, if I put my mind to something, I eventually figured out how to succeed at it. Okay, through all my life, sports, academics, anything, puzzles, any challenge that I really, no matter how difficult it was, if I was stuck with it, put my mind to it, I would eventually I couldn't figure this out. I could not get rid of the anger, could not get rid of my anxiety, could not stop the relationship failures. And it really bothered me. I mean, it really made me feel as successful as I was as a physician. It made me feel like a failure personally.
I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
I feel like that when I get angry.
Yeah. Nobody likes not having control of yourself, and it really feels like the anger just like a demon takes you over, makes you say things and do things that, you later regret. And you say, I wish I hadn't done that. And I'm not going to do that next time. But then there you go. You do it again the next time. So it was that kind of a thing. So it caused problems with my family. At one point, I had been angry at my mother for a number of years as I grew up. because she kept treating me as a child, even though I was maturing and becoming, a teenager, and then later on as a doctor, she still kept treating me like a child.
It's common.
And I got furious, and I kept trying to get her to stop, and she wouldn't stop. And we kept having these fights. And at one point, I remember I had a cold. I was in my residency, so I was taking care of patients in the hospital. And I had a head cold, so I decided not to go in the hospital and spread the germs around. And she happened to call me, and she heard my nasal congestion, and she starts telling me how to take care of my cold. And I'm looking at the phone. I'm saying, does this woman not understand I'm taking care of critically ill patients in the ICU? And she's telling me how to take care of my cold. And I said, literally, I got so angry with her. I said, that's it. I want you out of my life. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore.
That's a big angry response.
Yeah. And I said, that's it. And I hung up the phone. A couple of minutes later, my father called and said, what did you get your mother so upset? What did you do? What did you tell? And I explained to him, and I said, Dad, I have no problem with you. It's just I can't be around Mom anymore. She drives me crazy. I just can't be around her. And he said, well, sorry, son, but we're a package deal. So if you don't want to be around her, then you're not going to be around me. So literally, for the next 7 years, living in the same city, just a couple miles apart, I didn't have any contact or any communication with my mother or my father.
Wow.
And that anger just stewed for all that time until, and also I was going through the personal development stuff and other personal development stuff of my own. And I finally got to the point where I realized where my anger was coming from that I hadn't understood before. And that's what finally enabled me to get my hands on the controls. And also it made me realize that the whole thing with my parents was something that was really stupid, that I never should have been angry about in the first place. I just didn't have the proper perspective on it. And once I did, I realized, I called them up and scheduled a meeting, and we, apologized, and we, we reestablished our relationship. Yeah.
Good. What I'm hearing is that there's levels of anger. When I think about being angry, I haven't had the experience as massive as cutting somebody out of my life in that way. And yet I certainly don't like the anger either.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is that, listeners, Mort is talking about really in deep, deep anger, which of course we have, and maybe he's just more aware of his than I am. I don't know, but
the little kinds of the day-to-day irritations and annoyances can really build up, and a lot of marriages actually go down the tubes, not because of big, boisterous anger things, although that sometimes can be there, but it's the day-to-day little stuff that keeps eating away at us, and we hold the anger in. Sure. And then it just accumulates, and it just eats away at the fabric of the relationship, so it can be, even if it's small anger, it can be very damaging over time,
That makes a lot of sense. And even with our children, we can have anger that just perpetually irritates when they don't listen, when they don't understand. And maybe we get mad at ourselves because we're not able to get them to understand, or get them to follow through, or get them to know. Whatever it is that we get frustrated by because they're not behaving the way we want them to, or maybe we have something else we want to do, and their continuous need and being in our face is the thing that is irritating. So many things.
Yes.
So how is it then that you teach people that we could really eliminate this response from our lives? I don't even know that many people have even considered that it's possible to eliminate it, because we've been taught that you need to learn to manage it.
Yes. And that's the problem, is most people don't believe that eliminating anger is possible, and because they've been told that it's not. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have been told anger is just a natural part of life. We're even told that you should have anger in your relationships, because that you only get angry at people that you really care about. So it's almost like the two are fused, and it's not true. I know plenty of people that have great relationships and they hardly ever get angry at each other. So it's not required that you get angry to have a good relationship. But people have sort of rationalized it and excused it and said, oh, well, we need to have anger to be fully human and all that kind of stuff. Well, you don't. But the main thing is that we don't really understand. We've been misinformed. Talk about misinformation. Everybody's talking about misinformation today. Mm-hmm. We're talking about it in the political arena. We're talking about it in the media, all that kind of stuff. But there's a tremendous amount of misinformation all over in other parts of our lives. And in healthcare in particular, and around anger specifically, we've really been badly educated about where our anger comes from. To give you an example of that, most of us believe, because our common sense tells us this, that anger is like a 1-2 cause-effect process. Something happens, Somebody says something, our kids misbehave or don't do what we say, and we feel angry, okay, or upset. And it looks like it's a direct 1 to 2 cause effect.
It's not.
And that's how we see it. That's how we see it. Okay. And so it looks like a 2-step process, a trigger and a response with anger. And that's how I thought of it back when I was in my 20s and 30s and having a lot of anger and not being able to get rid of it. It wasn't until I found out that it's actually a 4-step process that causes our anger. And almost nobody knows that. And most people are not being taught that.
I know I was taught growing up just what you said. Somebody else outside of me does something, and then I get angry in response. That was clearly the way I was raised also. I have learned otherwise, but this is good. I don't know what those 4 steps are.
Because you can see the trigger and you can feel the anger, and those things are tangible and they're connected, it looks like a direct cause-effect link. Okay. The 2 steps in the middle are invisible because they're happening inside us. Okay. They're happening in our brain, they're happening in our body, and we don't feel them, we don't see them. Unless you know what they are, you wouldn't know that they're there. So it's understandable that people have been misinformed and have false ideas about where their anger is coming from, because that's all we see and that's all we're taught. But there's 2 more steps.
I'm eager to know.
There's 2 more steps in the process. The first invisible step is we have these internal filters. So we don't see the events that are angering us just as they are. We see them through the filters that are built into our brains and our bodies that have been built in over millions of years of conditioning and evolution. But everything, there's so much information out in the world coming in our senses, our brains can't handle all of it. So it chunks it down, it filters it, it compacts it, and it leaves a lot of stuff out to make it manageable for us. But we don't realize we have these internal filters. We think we're seeing truth, when in fact we're seeing filtered. The reality is it gets filtered through our brains and our bodies, which changes and distorts it from what the actual truth is. Each emotion has its own set of maybe 3 or 4 main filters. If you view the world in that way, you'll get the emotion. And consequently, if you aren't viewing the world that way, you won't get the emotion.
So our pre-programmed filter that we view the world through dictates the emotion that's going to come in as a result of whatever triggers are around us.
Yes. And for example, and every emotion has its own little program inside of us of ways of thinking and behaving that automatically get triggered in us that produce the emotion. It's like on a regular computer. If you push the A key on your computer and the A appears on your monitor screen, that's another one of those things where it looks like it was a direct 1, 2. Push the key, A appears on the screen. But that's not the whole story. There's programs have to be in the computer for that to happen. First, there has to be an operating system so the computer turns on and does anything. And then there has to be another program that's like a word processor that when you push the A key, it makes the pixels configure on the screen in that configuration of an A. That's a program running in the background that's doing that. Now, it's invisible to us. And we don't need to know anything about it. But if you build computers or you write software, you got to know. But as a user, we don't have to know anything about it. All we know is we push the A key and we always get the A on the screen. But there are programs in the background that are doing that. And it's the same with our emotions. If somebody pushes your anger button, however they do it, and you get the emotion of anger, there's a program running inside you that's actually producing all those hormones and whatever gets secreted to actually give you the feelings of anger. It's coming from the program. It's not coming directly from the outside event. Now, without the outside event, you wouldn't have been triggered to have those programs get activated. But it's the internal programs that are creating the anger. And A, we don't know that. And B, we don't know what they are. Okay. And once you figure out or understand what the programs for anger are, then you will know, regardless of what triggers you, whether it's your kids, whether it's a surly person in a checkout line, or a traffic jam, or the Democrats or the Republicans or Putin or who knows what, whenever something triggers you, doesn't matter what it is, it's always going to be viewed through those same 3 filters if your response is anger. Now, if your response is anxiety or guilt or some other emotion, you got different filters that you're looking through. But there's always a consistent in anger, it's 3 main filters that we're looking through. So that's the first hidden cause. The 4 cars, there's the triggering event, which we see. Then there's the filters, which we don't see. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then there's the fourth step is the anger. Then there's something between the filters and the anger. And we don't see that either. And by the way, this stuff happens so fast. I mean, it happens like lightning fast. It just,
Oh, yeah.
and it's automatic. It's like we're not actively thinking anything. It's these filters just click in and we just see the world through them. Okay. Just to give an example, if you're in a grocery store and you're with a friend and you're standing side by side and you look down the aisle and there's a mother and a child and the child's misbehaving and the mother hauls off and slaps the child really hard and you're both watching that. Okay. One of you might get angry by witnessing that. The other one might not. It tells you it's not the event, it's the filters.
Sure.
Yeah. So if you look at that and you think that mother's not behaving properly, as a mother should, then you might get angry. But on the other hand, if you think that's good parenting, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but I'm saying if you're a person that believes that that's good parenting and that child's going to be better off for the tough love that it's getting, you're not going to be angry. So you got two people with different filters from their own histories and their own personal values and beliefs, looking at things, the same event, completely differently. So it's always the filters that create the emotion. But that third step that kicks in, that's invisible, is not only do we see things through our filters, but immediately our brain and our body tell us, in so many words, that what we're seeing is true.
So we're validating that our belief, our values, our thoughts about the filter that we look through, that the filter is true.
Yeah, it tells us that we're not looking through filters. Okay. When we are.
Right.
It tells us whatever's coming through those filters, that's true. No doubt about it. You shouldn't question it. That's the absolute truth. And then we react. When we believe it's true, we react. When we don't believe it's true, or maybe we see it's not true in some way, that kind of messes up the reaction. And we don't have the anger as strong, or we don't have it at all sometimes.
Sure.
So a lot of times what happens, and again, this is something I didn't know back when I was in my 20s and 30s, is a lot of times when I was angry, when I got triggered to be angry, but what was coming through my filters was wrong in some way. But to me, it felt right. And matter of fact, the anger makes you feel even more right. You feel real more, righteous and justified in what you're seeing. So it's really a crazy thing. Your anger is being caused in truth by wrongness most of the time, which we don't see. And then we've got this, this stamp of truth, I call it, where we automatically stamp it true. And then the anger doubles down and makes us believe it's true, when in fact, all along, it's not completely true. So we have these distorted views of things that give us the anger, and we don't see exactly what's happening to us. And then we can't step in and correct for whatever misperceptions there are in the filters, or whatever the filter leaves out, which is a lot usually, because all filters leave out stuff. It's like, you turn on your favorite news channel, whatever kind of channel it is, there's hundreds of stories that they're not telling you about.
Right.
Because they don't have time. So they're filtering everything, so these are the ones we think are important, and not only here's our spin on them, but we're leaving out just as many as or more that we're presenting to you. Okay. Our brains do the same thing. Then we get angry because we only see it one way or see one side of it or whatever. And then we're missing the other pieces of what's true about the situation.
Having an understanding of this really would make a difference in how it is that we view what ourselves and what our children do, and obviously everybody, but thinking of parents specifically and children, I think that a knowledge of this would really help us just experience the whole situation differently.
Yes, because if we could see what was really going on, if we could see that for example, when our kids misbehave, we think we're seeing accurately what's happening, but it's actually being filtered.
Right.
And sometimes it's being distorted based on a lot of different factors, but sometimes it's being distorted, but we don't see that. So we think we're reacting to what the truth is. And really it's a distorted version of the truth, but nobody tells us. We don't have any internal bells and alarms that go off that tell us. The only one is the anger. The anger is the clue that we're probably misreading something or seeing something not completely accurately, because that's where the anger comes from. Okay. But we've never been trained to think of it that way. But the opposite, we've been trained to think our anger is telling us that what's coming through our filters is true and it's justified, and we should be angry, and we have a right to be angry. And Doggone it,
Okay, so I want to turn this for just a second. When parents get angry, it affects our children quite a lot.
Yes.
As briefly and directly as you can you tell us how the anger of parents affects children? To help us understand why it is so important to run down this avenue and know that we can eliminate it. We need to know how it affects our kids.
Yeah. As parents, we're adults. So we have adult brains. Okay. And we know how we feel when people get angry at us. We don't like it, but we can handle it. It's like a lot of times it may hurt, it may sting personally, but we don't take it terribly personally because we know it's another adult getting angry and we've gotten angry and we've got all this experience with anger and our brains have matured and everything. So we can brush it off, even though we don't like it, even though it stings, we can brush it off. Kids are a little different. Kids' brains are not as developed. They don't have the same perspective. They tend to sometimes internalize, and take it personally. So if a parent just, automatically gets angry in a knee-jerk kind of a way, we think, well, the kids, it's not going to have that big of an impact on the kid. I just lost my cool and, they'll forget about it. And they might, but also it might linger. They might carry away, oh, I'm a bad person, or gee, mommy or daddy got mad at me. There must be something wrong with me. And then it sets up all those kind of negative self-talk and things that we all get stuck with as we go through life. And then we have to deal with as adults. And it can make kids scared because they're, when they see their parents getting angry, they're fearful. Well, what if they get real angry and lose control and, there's some physical violence or something. So it engenders a lot of anxiety. And then the kids are less likely to want to be around, if they think you're going to be very volatile. All that stuff starts happening that doesn't end well, in our relationships and creates a lot of tension in the relationship. So it's a different thing. Kids experience parents' anger differently than a parent would experience another adult's anger. But we think wrongly, this is like a filter we have. we look at it through how our brains work. Now we know our brains work. And we assume that our kids are going to react to, will have the same brains, and they don't. Which is why, by the way, when you have kids with learning disabilities or other kinds of impairments, we're expecting them to act like a person with a normal brain would act. And sometimes they don't have a completely normal brain. It's not that their brain is bad, but it just doesn't function like ours does. But we automatically assume that it will. And so we may tell somebody something 2 or 3 times and they may say, I got it. They may look like they have it. And you assume that they have it and they're going to behave accordingly. And then 5 minutes later, they act like you never said anything because their brains don't retain it to the same degree as we have the expectation that they should. So sometimes that's the false filter that drives our anger. I told them 3 times that it should have stuck. Well, that's assuming they have a brain like an adult, but they don't. They have a brain like a kid. And not only do they have a brain like a kid, but they have a brain like a kid that maybe has some problems retaining things or behaving appropriately in certain situations, that just we lose touch with that reality, which is the truth, and we see it falsely, and then we get angry.
Right.
Like they should have. And if you really saw it truthfully, they'll go like, oh, well, okay. Yeah, I shouldn't have really expected it. Yeah, I could tell them to them 10 times. It doesn't mean they're going to do it because their brain doesn't work like mine does. Right. Or like, my friend's does or something like that. So it's a tough thing because we automatically go there.
Right.
And assume that. Yeah.
You've explained it very clearly. It sounds like there's 2 main things that are tricky for us. One, with our expectations, that we expect our children will think like we think, but they don't have the same brain because they're young. And then the second thing pertains to many of the listeners here. Their child's brain is neuroatypical. We just call it atypical. We don't say typically not normal or those kind of things because it's pretty normal to not have a typical brain.
That's true.
So what is typical anyway? But either way, we learn how to get into their operating system and understand where they're at, which the stuff you said is so much meat for us to think about in how the trigger will happen. And then we have our filters that we look at. We decide if it's true. And then
we don't decide. It's decided for us.
It's kind of like embeddedly decided.
It's automatically decided for us in the beginning in a knee-jerk way. Then we get the emotion. But once we have the emotion, then we can go back and say, oh, all right, now was it really true? Now you have some choice in the matter. But it's built into our brains and our bodies and it happens in knee-jerk. when in the beginning. So it's not like we're thinking something. It's our brain is just adding it on, and then we have a chance to think about it once it happens.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Mort, this has been fabulous. Thank you for all this information for us. It is a wealth of knowledge, and thank you for sharing it with the Language of Play family. Thank you for spending your time with me today here.
You're
Is there
very,
any
very welcome.
last thing that you want to tell our parents before?
Well,
I will have your links and your contact information in the show notes.
Be on the lookout for the book called Dr. Orman's Life-Changing Anger Cure. And what I do is I go into much more depth than we've had an opportunity to do here today about all these things we've been talking about. And everything I teach in my 10-session Angry No More coaching program, I put into that book. So it really gives you soup to nuts, a blueprint for where anger comes from so you can understand it better, and how you can get your hands on what to do once you know what those filters are, and how you can deal with the anger and make it go away just by using those insights and without having to punch punching bags and run 5 miles and, do deep breaths and relaxation, which are all fine. They all have positive benefits. You can really get rid of your anger just by correcting for whatever faulty things come through the filters.
That sounds great. So thank you so much again.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.